Hi, everyone. My name is Tracy McKnight, and I'm the music supervisor of the Sundance documentary Rebel Hearts, which is in competition. And I'm here today as the moderator of our Rebel Hearts music panel. And I couldn't be more excited to bring the whole team together. So what I'd like to do is just do a quick round of introductions. Although I'm not David Letterman, some of my guests need no introduction because they are awesome. So I would like to get to that, tell you a little bit about it, and then we're going to jump into how all the music came together. So our distinguished panel, we will start with our director, Pedro Kos. Pedro is an award-winning filmmaker who previously co-directed Bending the Arc, which premiered at the 2017 Sundance Film Festival. He's also recently directed a short film called Lead Me Home, which is a beautiful documentary about what's going on in the homeless situation here in our country, and of course, our fearless leader and director of Rebel Hearts. Next up is Ariel Marx, who is our composer. Hi, Ariel.
Hi, Tracy.
Ariel is an elected composer, creating unique worlds of sound. Her scores have premiered in films at Sundance, Toronto, South by, and many more. She also has a solo album out now, which everyone should check out, called Luthier, which is out on Node Records, and we're so happy to have her here today. Next up is Sharon Van Etten. Hi, Sharon, great to see you. Sharon is an American singer, songwriter, and actress. She has released 5 studio albums, the latest, which is Remind Me Tomorrow. She also had a hit at Sundance last year, Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always. And I also had the pleasure of having her perform live at the festival last year for our Sundance celebration of music and film. So good to have you here today. Next up is Rufus Wainwright. Hi, Rufus. So praised by the New York Times, Rufus has established himself as one of the great male vocalists, songwriters, and composers of his generation. He also has a phenomenal new album out called Unfollow the Rules, which is nominated for a Grammy. And we're so happy to have him here today. So welcome everyone, and welcome to our Rebel Hearts film discussion. So what I'd like to start off with is just telling our audience briefly what the film is about, and then we're gonna go in with our director, Pedro Kos. So Rebel Hearts tells the story of a group of pioneering nuns who bravely stood up to the patriarchy of the Catholic Church, fighting for their equality, their convictions, and their livelihoods against an all-powerful cardinal. From marching in Selma in 1965 to the Women's March in 2018, these women, including the iconic pop artist Sister Corita Kent, have reshaped our society with their bold acts of defiance and continue to make waves today. I couldn't be prouder to work on this film, and I'd like to start off with Pedro. So Pedro, tell us how this movie came about and what inspired you to do a deep dive into the story.
Thank you, Tracy. Well, first of all, I just want to say, like, what a mind-blowing, extraordinary honor is to be on this panel with all of you geniuses. First of all, who inspired me every single day. Tracy, Ariel, Rufus, Sharon. First of all, I'll hold it together, but I just want to fanboy a little bit of how extraordinary you all are, and how excited I am to be on this panel with you all. But Rebel Hearts really began actually over 20 years ago with our incredible producer, Shawnee Isaac Smith, who began documenting these extraordinary women from Anita Caspary, Helen Kelly, Pat Reef, and began doing interviews with them over 20 years ago, and then amassed an extraordinary archive of firsthand accounts of the Immaculate, of the formerly Immaculate Heart Sisters, and and their story of their joyous rebellion against the patriarchy of the church. Years later, Shawnee connected with Kira Carstensen, one of our other amazing producers, and Kira thought I would respond to this story and reached out to me with, and then when I looked at the material, I fell in love. It was sort of an arrow shot through my heart. Someone who had who knows firsthand sort of the structure, the growing up with the very rigid structure of the church in a certain way, and sort of, I say that the battle lines between the conservative and progressive sides of Catholicism right through the middle of me, and so it was something that was really called, and the way these incredible women sort of reimagined that structure and saw beyond that structure was incredibly inspiring, and I knew it was something that I had to do. And one of the things that was really important was grounding it in the present and sort of framing the why now, or why tell the story now, right? And it's really about their awakening to these oppressive structures. I think it's also very much a very present story. It's very contemporary. It really speaks to the moment we are in today. And this calling that they had to be really to always be a part of the world, and to be a part of the movements of the time, at its core also for me was something that's intrinsically tied to music, and to the way the music is helping tell the musical experience that it is going to help tell the story. It is the heart, it is the emotion, and it is the roller coaster ride in a certain way that that we go on. And it was, for me, music has always been a huge part of the process, how I approach. I always create a playlist before I tackle a project, and it was also, and this project was no different. And so one of the ways that I started assembling this, I always knew that music was going to play really a lead role in the telling of this awakening of the Immaculate Hearts. So yeah, I don't know if I answered your question, but that was sort of the
I think you did. No, that's great. I think that, so we're here today to talk about how music takes shape and how it all kind of falls together. And, to me, music is the soul of a film, creating atmosphere and creating emotions and creating excitement. So why don't you tell us about how the song arc came together and how that was important for you? Because we cover from going from a Nina Simone to First Aid Kit to Patti Smith. We're going to talk about our original songs later, but there was something definite in mind that we needed to create in order to help tell this story.
Absolutely. And it was, when I started assembling the playlist, I guess, I gravitate to not only songs of the time, but also I think songs that embody sort of a spirit that encapsulates the sort of the emotional journey of the oppression and rebellion of the Immaculate Hearts. Mm-hmm. And so I think it was very important for me not just to be in the 60s, but also that the song selection span also the decades in which the story spans. And and I gravitated to old favorites of mine from the 60s, like Daydream, the Wallace Collection's Daydream, which was I've been listening for decades now, and Nina Simone, who I grew up as a child in Brazil. I've been listening to Nina Simone since I was, I don't know, I before I was born in my mother's belly. So I grew up in a household that was devoted to Nina Simone, and so just to be able to.
We also do a play on Hey Sister, so like bringing in like Along Comes Mary and Hey Sister. So there's some, like sort of tongue-in-cheek kind of playing on some Catholicism, and some things that happen in the church.
Some unexpected gems that, exactly, that speak to the themes of Catholicism. Absolutely. Oh, and the Hey Sister track is for the labor section. I thought it was something that really kind of spoke to sort of the oppression of what was happening with the sisters and how they were being sort of in awful labor conditions, having to teach in extremely overcrowded classrooms, and it was a way to I think make that story more more contemporary and more urgent in a certain way.
Well, as we put songs throughout the film to help tell a story, there is also a composer that kind of anchors everything as it moves along and ties all the threads together. So Ariel, I'd love to kind of start here with you of how did your creative conversations go with Pedro? How do you tackle this subject? How do you tackle the different timelines? And then what approach, if any, did the Catholicism or what you were watching play into how you were writing?
That's a great question. Just like Pedro talked about, when I watched the film, there was an arrow straight through my heart of wanting to tell this story about these women. And as I've been learning more and more about I have personal family connections now of women that I know who have gone to school during the time that these women taught. And it was just a really immediate gravitation for me. Pedro was very amazingly clear and wonderfully descriptive about the kind of palette and world he wanted music to serve. And I guess there are three sort of categories of score in this film. And one is kind of embodying the experimentalism and kind of bold, broad boundary pushing that the sisters did. And that is much more, in an experimental world, using lots of aleatoric techniques on strings. Everything's a bit more textural. There's synths and vocals. And so that's its own world. And then another world is the rigidity of Catholicism, and that revolves around the cardinal. And and some of it is tongue in cheek, but very kind of rigid, very classical approach, very little movement away from the click, and very, very rigid. And then the other in sort of reflection upon spirituality and Catholicism in general. We spoke in the beginning of the presence of vocals throughout the film, and songs are such a huge part in the film, but how do we decontextualize using voice, non-lyric voice, in a non-religious way? And so that was woven throughout through different palettes of their experimentalism, and mainly embodying the joy that they found in being college teachers and pushing boundaries and making art and inspiring people. So it was really great to get to explore all these different palettes.
Oh,
yeah.
Well, in the film, we're also happy to have 2 original songs. And so I'm going to start with Sharon. So Sharon, you've written a lot for film, and, again, congratulations on your film last year, and which I know you wrote an original song for as well. But before we talk about this song, just in general, I'm sure you get approached a lot for writing songs for film. And what is it that inspires you? Like, what was it about this project, and how do you kind of decide, like, yes, this is it for me? Like, we all have something like that with artists about how we connect to stories, and writing for a film or TV show is a very specific thing. So maybe could you elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, I feel like I'm still learning how to write for film, because my strength is writing songs. And I think one of the things I'm still navigating as I'm trying to enhance the scene, but I also am trying to work with my own nature. So
Mm-hmm.
I'll need to be personally connected to the characters and whatever it is that I'm going to be working on. Because if I don't have some kind of personal connection or have a relatable topic that I can feel like I can write about intuitively, then I don't feel like I'm going to be honest or happy with whatever I write. But I saw the film and I was deeply moved and felt much in tune with the characters. I felt like they were very timeless. and that socially and culturally it's still an important story to be told, because unfortunately we haven't gotten that far. But I was speaking with Pedro about palettes and about taste and about the marriage of certain types of genres, which is always exciting to me because, you know, he has a very classic sense of music, but he's also very emotional and sensitive. And so if you want to marry ideas like a classic feeling song, but also tease at choral arrangements or church and spiritual and soulful types of music, while also offsetting it with synths or drum beats and percussion. It's, for me, it's like marrying one of my songs with the actual score. And in hearing Ariel's music and knowing Rufus's music so well, I felt like I could do the film justice from the conversations I had with you both.
Well, how did you feel about, I know when some of our original initial conversations were about the organ, like the church, like that kind of, and you do it so beautifully, but tell us a little bit about that, because that to me immediately signifies, you know, this, you know, like church, you know, of being the Catholic school veteran that I am, but it brings you right in there.
Well, you know, you have to walk a line because you want you don't want to be overly literal, but
Right.
teasing at the idea of what, you know, religion versus spirituality, and you know, you want it to feel empowering, but you don't want it to be too, like too proud, you know? Like I feel like you have to find that happy balance of all these conflicting emotions that are conveyed in the film. But
Uh,
I think like having an organ, being offset by a drum machine helps ground that idea of religion in music. And my choral arrangements, which are inspired by my history in being in choirs growing up, but also always falling left of center in my darker and dissonant harmonies, because that's what I just geared towards. But it all felt in line with with the darkness, but also the light of the film.
uh, so Rufus, I would love to hear a little bit about, so you've written for many, many films, and one of my first films, you happen to be on our soundtrack. So I'm having this incredible moment, like from the Myth of Fingerprints.
Yes.
Literally, it was, I think, my like third movie I music supervised, and to now, all this, you know, many years later, you've had such success with writing for film, you know, from Shrek being a big, big, big iconic moment that everyone talks about. So what is it for you that connects you before we jump into the screening of the film? I'd like to hear a little bit about your perspective.
Well, it's interesting because I mean, this whole experience, as is often the case, I have found over the years, is that there's a kind of kismet that occurs, you know, on many levels. You know, one, I mean, I just realized when you mentioned that Sharon performed at Sundance last year. Well, I did too in that show. That was the last time I saw Sharon, was at that show that we did together, and now, you know, we're here together on this project. You know, it sort of happened organically, and then I too, you know, I have a step grandmother who was brought up by those nuns in LA, and many of her sisters actually became nuns in that order. And so that was, so that subject matter itself was, you know, it's kind of rooted in my childhood, just hearing stories about it. Because my mother, who grew up with Catholic nuns in Quebec, had a very different experience. You know, very different, more typical, shall we say. And anyway, so there's that. And then, you know, my daughter, Viva, lives around the corner from the, you know, from the Immaculate Heart School. And so I just feel like there are these, what always seems to happen, and it happened in this case, is there's just these elements that conspire, and next thing you know, the song appears, and it's really becomes more of like an exercise of just, you know, flagging down the ship or landing the plane, and that you just have to be really sensitive and really kind of almost like blank in terms of what, the messages that are coming through these various, situations, that are surrounding this film. This film, as I said before, this was a great example of that that sorcery that occurs.
Well, yes, and by the way, thank you for performing, since I was one of the hosts last year, but yes, you were both there, and it was such a phenomenal night at the Celebration of Music and Film last year. So Pedro, from the director point, right? So now you have Sharon and we have Rufus, and they're writing original songs for two very specific parts of the film. Take us through the process of listening to them for the first time, because you had some real emotional moments with it, which was very moving. But when you're listening, it's a lot of trust that you have between an artist and a filmmaker. Say, here's my story, and then you have to let them go and do what they do. So tell us a little bit about that.
Well, absolutely, but and I had also you, Tracy, who, expertly, collaborating with you and sort of like discussing the potential art, the potential artists or collaborators on this. And I just want to give you a shout out and thank you for, the extraordinary collaboration as we, we thought, and really Sharon and Rufus were just sort of like match made in heaven. I mean, a huge fan of both of you. I've been listening to you for, for a long time. And when Tracy mentioned both your names, I was like, yes. I mean, I almost had to like hold myself not to like faint with excitement. But with with the opening and sort of like these really integral, very, very, very important parts of the journey, which is the taking off and the landing, and Sharon, I have to say you really helped us on the film. I love the beautiful dance that happens where when you started, we didn't have an opening. We were still cutting the opening, and your your first pass of conjunctions, when we talked about, we connected. I connected with Sharon and Rufus both before they went off and wrote their magical songs, and we talked about the things that we wanted for the open and sort of the subverting of expectations, this build of where you feel really the rebellion in a way, and it's that capturing that in a way, that public dialogue of what was happening in the 60s, of how they were viewed as these obstreperous nuns that were betraying the faith, but at the same time it was a time of change. It was so many movements happening, and they were really a part of the world, and sort of capturing that build of this movement was really important. We talked about like being Norma Ray and like really kind of rallying the troops, and sort of this battle cry. And when we heard that, the organ that's now then begins to being subverted and build into something unexpected, I was really inspired, and Sharon, that really helped us inform how the edit went and how and create that through line of that build of what that really was. And so it was really sort of integral. And then we went back and forth and kind of like talked about the details of the build itself. But I think, from the get-go, that conjunction, the opening song, really captures this growth of this movement in a beautiful way. And in a way that subverts expectations, which was something that we really wanted. And with the landing, the beautiful landing, it was that beautiful, when Rufus, you sent in Secret Sister, of the troubled land over, weekly so blown away by the sensitivity of the lyrics. Just definitely brought many tears to my eyes, and also sort of it captures it not only celebrates them, but I think it really kind of sets us in the time of now, actually, of like, we are still in the troubled land, right? We are still sort of marching forward, and in a way, it's the fine line of celebrating, but also kind of marching on, and to really inspire us to keep going and to continue, and to build on the work that already has been done by these women. And I think the song beautifully walks that line in an extraordinary way. And so I think we really wanted something that was going to be rousing, but at the same time, it's going to not let us off the hook. And I think that was, you caught that in the lightning in that bottle beautifully.
Well, I will. Can I say one thing regarding that?
Please.
Quickly? No. I just wanted to say, as I mentioned, my daughter lives near the Immaculate Heart school, and that's on Franklin and she lives on Franklin and Taft. Anyway, so it's New Beechwood Canyon, and and for anybody who lives in LA, I mean, yes, the homeless problem is terrible all over the city, but really somehow I go there a lot. There's something about that area, and specifically around the 101, driving through Hollywood, and even today when I was, after these rains that we've had, where it really is like horrific, the situation outside. So it's so certainly in writing the song, I was deeply affected by the now, and just this this humanitarian crisis which is occurring outside the gates of the school still, and that there should be people marching out of churches and institutions to come out and help these people in need, because it's just so obvious and so painful. So it was it's very connected to what's going on today.
Also, Rufus, I think you also nailed, we wanted to celebrate them at the end too, which is, I mean, let's think about it for a second. Like, these are feminist nuns, like what they did was extraordinary. And to be able to have something anthemic on both the beginning and the end of the film is really cool. And how did you, so you actually knew about these nuns? Like, because when I reached out, like when I talked to Jorn, Rufus's manager and husband, and friend, he was like, we're familiar. Like, did you actually know this story?
Well, I'd be curious to hear what Ariel's story is concerning her family. But my step grandmother, she this is my grandfather's second wife. She was brought up by the nuns, and I should say that's where she went to high school. She studied with them, and then, as I said, some of her relatives, her sisters, became some of those nuns. But what I will say is that to this day, her name is Martha Fay. She's incredibly well educated, and went on to be a great writer and a real thinker, but definitely, and also a real activist and a real leftist, to this day, and really credits that period with imbuing her with this spirit and this fighting feeling and this search for justice, and she's now in her 70s, and she's and it's just it's funny because I actually called her before doing this panel, because I wanted to kind of get the story straight, because I didn't because I just sort of just get all the ducks in order, and the nuns in order, and then anyways, and then I was, it was interesting because she was, I could definitely hear in her voice and in her comportment, like it's still a very passionate subject for her, and it's very, and there were some things she didn't, she's like, don't talk about this and that, nothing that I'm going to mention, but nothing scandalous, but it's very sacred to her, this subject and these women, and what they mean to her and what they mean to her family, because so many of her family went through it. So it was it was very palpable, and it was very good for me to do this before this conversation, because I didn't want to step on anybody's feet. So, but I was struck by how emotional and how their spirit lives on. But yeah, I'm just curious though about Ariel, what your connection is with the family, with your family. Or
So
not.
I found out about this way in, I think, when Pedro and I were nearly on the last cues. So I had no idea as we were working. But my mom's dear friend had gone, I don't know whether it was college or the high school, but had been there 66 through 70.
Yeah.
So during the showdown.
Yeah.
So it was just another, and she has a huge community of her high school, or I don't remember who they were, but her colleagues who, just remember it really fondly and passionately.
Yeah, and I think with me, with Martha Faye, what her main concern was that, what I could tell is that she didn't want it to be viewed as this sort of like hippie kind of psychedelic, even though that's that was maybe part of the aesthetic in a sense, but it was a very serious, very rigorous situation where people they were really putting their necks out there, and it wasn't like this fun party thing. That's kind of what I gleaned, so, but
Absolutely. I mean, they were so extraordinarily, I mean, they had, between this order, the IHMs here in LA, they had more PhDs and doctorates and master's degrees than all of the priests in LA, combined. And they were, Corita, the famous iconic pop artist, students flocked to her classes, but they were not easy classes. I mean, they had a lot of, the education that they got was rigorous and was very, but they were taught that they could do anything. They were empowered to be leaders, in all fields, from science to the arts to literature to law and all sorts of other fields. And that's the incredible thing about them. They were really in tune with the needs of the times and with the needs of the community. And that came with like, as you said, they were like, it wasn't easy. It was like going to class was not like, it was not a party. It was rigorous, but it was also very empowering for their students at the same time.
Sharon, when I reached out to your team, I know that you had an emotional connection to the film as well and the subject matter. Do you want to elaborate on that in any way?
Of course. Growing up, both of my parents were pretty religious. I didn't have a direct connection to Immaculate Heart, but my mother, she used to be very rigid, and we would go to church every Sunday. But as she raised 5 children, she kind of found her own spirituality. And it wasn't until years later that I was able to reflect on what she actually gave up to help raise her kids, because she had 5 kids, and while my dad would work during the day and she was a stay-at-home mom for 15 years, they figured out a way for her to go to night school, and she got her master's in teaching by the time I was in 6th grade. And she has found herself through her and my dad figuring things out as I got older, but through raising 5 kids, she also was more of a spiritual person than a religious person. And she was also a painter, and she gave up painting to raise the kids and pursue her master's. But I just see all these different lives live in the nuns that I saw in the documentary, and the enforcing, I'm not being the most articulate right now. But she's just a really special person, and I see her in these women, and I immediately thought of my mother when I said yes to working on this, because I knew it's something that she'd be proud of.
Um, that's so nice.
Okay.
When you know, I went to Catholic school, which I think most of you we've talked about, but and didn't art the nuns in my Catholic school were pretty tough. They were definitely tough. They disciplined with a sort of a humiliation in mind and I have significant memories of maybe not being so nice to some of my classmates or someone being isolated in a classroom. And I don't know, when I saw this film for me and being a music supervisor, I felt like, wow, this was just like this healing moment as well. Like, not all nuns were like the nun experience that I had, that there were these other groups that were warm and cool and smart and wanting more and feminists and having an opinion, and how sometimes we're we're a product of our experiences sometimes of however that happens for us. But then when I see these women, they are fierce and cool, and what they had to do in order to get what they needed, that they didn't take no for an answer. And at that time, think about it, it could have been a lot easier just to cave. And instead, as people will see in this beautiful movie, that they rallied. And one of the best things that I can say is, like, I get to be the ambassador of music for such an incredible film. And nothing brings me more joy when I can reach out to Rufus and Sharon, and you get that, and Ariel, and everyone says yes right away. With this group had all the same enthusiasm across the board for what we were seeing. And I just think this movie is going to make a big difference. So I'm kind of opening the floor now. Is there any other music topic that anyone might like to share?
I mean, I did want to say one thing about the nuns in general, if that's okay. No, just in defense of nuns in general, because as I said, I grew up with nuns as well, though most of them were ex-nuns, but I had, and also especially in music school, like you would, a lot of my piano teachers were nuns when I started. And then this is something that's mentioned in the film, which I think is also really important, and which really is a subject that deserves a lot of attention, is that, when my mother, who was really brought up by nuns, like in the 50s, in Quebec, which was a heavy duty Catholic and very intense and kind of a negative experience. That being said, when she was, years later, she was sick with cancer. And there's a hospital in Montreal that she was called the Royal Victoria, an old hospital, and she was there for months, and I would go visit her, a lot, and it was pretty dingy and pretty, dirty and dark and stuff like that. But I would go, and I remember someone saying to me there, an older person was like, "You don't understand. I mean, 30 years ago when the nuns were here, it was spotless." And they took care of everything. And I think this film really also, points out how the nuns they had to clean all the buildings. They had to, they did all this like heavy duty manual labor to like just keep the world neat and clean for most people. And now we don't, without it was indentured labor, which is bad. But that being said, there was something about the spirituality of their work that was very profound, and that should also be celebrated, even though it was kind of horrible that they had to do it. but it was this, I don't know. And I like how the film touches on that and really explains that, and that kind of double standard.
We kept everything immaculate.
Yeah.
Also, one thing that I thought might be nice to mention is that these nuns they were signed to Capitol Records. Can you tell us a little bit about the sisters of the Immaculate Heart Trio and a little bit about that? I mean, these ladies are so incredible.
Sister Mary Marx Zion and her sisters, Sister May Mark was on the piano, and there was cello and violin, and they were signed to Capitol Records in the 60s. They went around the country and they toured and they gave performances. And I think they did recorded for Capitol Records, especially a Schubert trio in B flat. Yeah, they were artists themselves, and not only Corita, but they had an amazing music department, and yeah, so they toured the country.
Was this after the singing nun in France? Because there was the singing nun in France who had a hit, in the 60s, and I imagine that Capitol Records then probably wanted to have the American version.
I would have to look into that, but that sounds about right. Yeah. And it was what a story. This trio of nuns touring the country with with their music. What a way to be a part of the world. And yeah, so there they were in full habit in Capitol Records, which is actually just down the street from Immaculate Heart, which is on Franklin and Western. So
did they have like a one record deal, or did they?
I think it was just for the one record that they did. Yeah, for that one. And but yes, and actually Mary Mark Zion, who like the other sisters, dispensed from her vows, actually later went to become, she developed actually something that's really interesting. It's not in the film, but she developed a technique for blind students that's actually, I think, still used today to learn music in a braille form of written music, and she really helped develop that here in LA with, I think, in partnership with the Braille Institute on Vermont.
How incredible.
Yeah.
Well, I think that wraps up our time. I wanted to say thank you to everyone. Thank you for everyone for all of your talents and being part of this incredible film and taking time out to talk to us in the Film Music House at Sundance 2021. And Pedro, in documentary competition, you rocked it. Congratulations for all your hard work. It's a beautiful, beautiful film. And you guys, thanks so much for everything. And I can't wait to see you at the premiere, even if we are Zooming.
Yes, well, congratulations to the whole team, to Ariel, Tracy, Rufus, Sharon. It's been the honor of my life to collaborate with the four of you. And I can't tell you how excited I am, and hope the world embraces this kick-ass story of these extraordinary women.